Hi, everyone. This is an amazing moment I am sharing with you today. I have the pleasure to have with me today Rebecca Rose and Tony Rodrigues. These two incredible people have amazing stories on Mars. They both were taken into the dark secret space programs, especially the Dark Fleet. And last week, well, a while ago, I did this video with Rebecca and on Mars, the indigenous Martians. So we thought we would follow up with Tony, who has amazing stories to compare. So, Tony, Rebecca, how are you?
Hi, I'm good.
Yeah, good to be here with you both. Yeah, very good.
I'm happy to be here. I'm thrilled you asked me.
Yeah.
So, Rebecca, last time we spoke about your experience with mantids, Martian mantids, and Martian reptilians. You had experience with both when you were an asset of Corroborates on Mars and the MDF, Mars Defense Force. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Any thought about what we've spoken about last time, please?
I was really relieved by our conversation to be able to share more of the story. A lot of times in interviews, we kind of run through try and run through like a whole story in like 50 minutes or something. And it was nice to just focus on that and kind of reiterate some of what I'd experienced. And kind of on the lighter side, there were, I don't know if we went into last time about some of the battles that we did have with the mantis later on. And I could talk about that at some point during our conversation today. And one thing I do maybe want to say is that I recognize that the mantids that I spoke about and that I was most familiar with or contacted most during my time on Mars, we're not the only group there, but that was my closest experience. So maybe I want to say that's like not necessarily the whole book on mantids on Mars, right? And I think there were factions that were not as maybe elevated, let's say, on Mars. I mean, it's a big planet with a lot of beings in different little pockets around it. So just to share that, I think. In my, there's so many memories and pieces of things, especially the battle stuff, and that are somewhat fragmented because they're very traumatic. It's like almost like a PTSD from some of the battle stuff with big, the sky's all lit up and we're being bombed or something. I mean, I've had quite bad experiences here on this planet with fireworks, and for a long time I didn't understand what that was about. So I'm still recalling some of those kind of heavier chunks of memory where we're being attacked or we're attacking others for maybe obvious reasons. But maybe we could come back around to that and maybe hear from Tony. I want to hear from Tony's perspective on things. Yeah.
I don't know what you'd want to hear. So I only had one encounter with them, and it was in a combat situation, but it was small scale. So we were a patrol. We were being support soldiers, and we were on what's called a bounding maneuver. And so they sent us out basically to draw them out. And while the soldiers were hidden up on the mountain and could shoot them. And what they did was they went the bugs, not only the mantid, but the other bugs, they were little beetles. And a couple of the large, 2 or 3 or more of the larger spider looking ones. And what they did was they got upwind of us and kicked up the dirt. They kicked dust up so that we couldn't really see. We could hear them, and they sounded, we could hear them stuck kind of chasing us, and we started running from. We knew they were, and we could hear the sound of them coming at us, and they engaged us. And what it is, they kind of lured us out of range of where the other soldiers were, or engaged another group. So there was I didn't get fully debriefed on what happened, but basically we got engaged, and 2 of the other guys died, and I was the last one. So I was behind the three of us running. So they grabbed me first and held me basically to get scanned. And then the mantid came up and put me in a dream state and kind of scanned to see what we were, because we were new on the battlefield. We were a completely different soldier. We were a support asset. They were trying to match numbers. So one soldier, that had very expensive, the armor and all the training and was groomed from birth. Like one of those soldiers was an expensive undertaking. So we were minimally trained. I had a railgun and an environmental suit. That was it. And we had stims.
Oh, wow.
We had stim packs that we used, and we had an auto tourniquet system. The soldiers had them in their armor. So if they lost a limb, the armor would tourniquet automatically. But we only had one, like we had an auto tourniquet we kept in our pocket. And so we were minimally equipped. But when we were engaged, the mantid came up to me and scanned me. It went and took me into a dream state, and it showed me snippets of my life. When it was narrating it to something else, I can only guess, like a hive mind, like it was narrating what it was seeing. And then it took me back to my childhood house. Like I was standing in the living room. I could smell it. I was standing in the living room of my house that I grew up, the house that I was abducted from and had no memories of. And it said, "This is who you are." So he said, "This is who you are." And even though it was an enemy in a combat mission, I felt, and this is bad. I mean, I don't know. So I'm trying to find the right words here. So it's strange. It was strange to everybody and strange to me, but I felt more of a camaraderie with that. I was treated with more respect from a combatant when I had my arm cut off. I was treated with more respect from that mantid than I was from the soldiers back in the base, from everybody that I was treated, like in the system, there were food, the soldiers would come up and knock your lunch tray. We had trays in the cafeteria. They'd knock it down, pick it up, and keep going. Like it was it was that kind of environment, like an immature kind of thing. Soldiers that had time.
100%. Yeah.
And so I can see the lights going off, Rebecca.
I'm like, I'm gonna start to cry because you said that. It was this is what Elena and I were talking about last time with the Mars. I call them the little reptilians, the shorter reptilians on Mars that picked me up. I had been shot out of the sky and I crashed, and they pulled me back to their place, and I stayed with them for a while. And ultimately, it didn't go well. I didn't survive that, but it's the same thing you said. Like, I have it was like the first time I was treated like something human, and not just a piece of junk to abuse and manipulate. So it's like, it's emotional in a way to have that, no matter who it's coming from or what their intention was. It's like, oh, this is really refreshing, because everything you and I had gone through to get to these points out on Mars was so debilitating and degraded. So yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, I read
absolutely. And then, so I was really afraid of the debriefing. So I made it. So I was wounded. They let me live. I was begging for my life the whole time. Please don't kill me. And it was very professional. I mean, that's the word I would use. Like something that was astute and professional. He was like, "Relax, calm down." And, telepathically, it made a contact. And he was like, "Calm down. I don't want to kill you. But just to be fair to you, if I'm ordered to, you're going to die." And like, he was very and it was respectful though. He was honest with me, and it was respect. And so that's what really impressed me, because up until that point, I had none, like on that level. And so when I went back to the debriefing, and he said, when they left, he's like, "Make sure you tell them we're not this stupid." And they took off and left me there. And I crawled around, got my auto tourniquet on my leg and on my arm. But then the two soldiers came and got me and took me back to base, and I woke up fixed the next day. I woke up in the infirmary in the bed with my arm back, with a new arm. And there were two guys that came in and debriefed me, and I was thinking, I'm gonna, in my mind, because I had been programmed to be extremely obedient, and in my mind, I still had a bit of a loyalty. And they were mad. They were like, what did you fall in love with a bug out there? They were ribbing me about it. They were, and I didn't say anything. I just kind of clammed up. But in my mind, I was thinking, he treated me better than you. He didn't treat me like this. And I told them everything, and I thought I was going to get grilled or like tortured. I thought they were going to give me drugs to debrief me, but really, they debriefed me for about 10 minutes. I said the same thing 2 or 3 times, and then they said okay, and that was it. And then they canceled the program. That was the end of that sortie. That hiking mission was the end of that program. They said the bugs had adapted quicker than they were supposed to the tactic. So they had whatever strategy guys that were in charge of that, and they said that they had adapted to the strategy much quicker than they were supposed to. They had a curve that they expected them to adapt, and they were going to roll out other things. So they canceled that, and then I went back. I wanted to ask you, what was the biggest base you were on that you can remember? Were you in a big were you in like an underground city base, or did you stay in smaller bases?
I was traveled around a little bit. It seemed like the main base I was at, I mean, it was all corporate, and there were some smaller outposts we were sent to. The main place seemed to be just south of Mars equator. I don't have names for anything, quite frankly. I've never been given names for any of that, but some of it was seemed like kind of remote places, but we were moved around from time to time. Yeah. And it's interesting too, we may have overlapped in because I think we were both taken in the same year for those Diamondbacks. Yeah.
I remember. Yeah, it was 82 for me as well. When I was taken was when it began. Yeah. Yeah. 82. So let me do the math real quick.
Yeah.
16. So it was like 88, 89 when I was 88, I think. 88 or 89 was when I would have been on Mars during that time. And I was there less than a year. 6 months to 9 months, I think, was the whole thing.
Yeah, you weren't that. Yeah, I recall this about your story, I think. I was going to say too, just about what you'd shared, like that they realized that the strategy was already kind of obsolete because they'd adapted to it. I always felt like we were adopting new strategies to co-opt them or fight them or experiment on them, or et cetera, et cetera. That is sort of in line with that. Like there was always something new. What else can we do to the mantids? Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like once they figure it out, they figure it out. And they were very, very well disciplined. Obviously it's a hive mind, a hive collective. So once it figured out what was going on, it would adapt. I mean, I'm speculating too, but they were at their wits' end, and there was an overrun. So I was at a forward base when we were doing the sorties that was abandoned, that had at one time been overrun by the insectoids. They had set up this base was a research facility. There were ruins nearby, like 1,000,000-year-old stone ruins that were piles of rocks. They were piled like the rocks that you find on the beach where people stack rocks, but they were like 30, 40 feet high. They were giant boulders that were stacked up vertically.
Yeah, we have some. Yeah, we
oh my
have
God.
some interesting. Yeah.
And,
do you remember the same place, Rebecca? Same place?
I hiked right through it. We hiked through them. Yeah. But so they. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. No, you go.
Please.
This is why I love you guys. No, that was we did several. So outside of the base, it had a set of doors that were in it, like recessed into a cave, so that you couldn't see from the air, and that's where the airlock was. And you'd step out into the lighter gravity. What is it? Half gravity. And then we'd acclimate to that. We'd take 10 or 15 minutes to acclimate to the gravity, and then we'd go on our hike. And it was cold. So we were in the middle of the day, it was still very cold. And we knew we had, even with our environmental suits, we had to be back by dark. So we were in somewhere kind of more northern. It was still very cold. It was sunny out, and blue sky, light blue, pale sky. And but we took separate routes. There were trails from so many people hiking that we went through the ruins, and they were like, don't touch it. The guys that they already researched it, don't touch anything. We went through, there was a circle. There was like a wall where it looked like, like when you find like the Hawaiians built stone walls for fishing camps or thing. When you find those old ruins, they're all over the place. It's where people were, tribes will just set up rocks on top of it and build wall. It was like that. There was a circular wall and you'd go down and there were pillars in there in the middle, and we hiked through it. They said it was like a few million years old. We were with soldiers, and they told us about it. They said, just don't touch them. And we stopped there for a minute, and then we'd go on our way. And but there was a research facility, and at some point they started to incur into the territory of the insectoids. And after a while, the insectoids just went into the facility, breached the facility and killed everybody. There were like 200 people. It was big enough for 200 people. And when I was there were only 50 or 60 people there. And it was, contractors and Marines and us. We were an experimental force that was to fight alongside the Marines. And we were it was a corporate thing. Like there was a corporate guy that was in charge of us. My guys that whatever I was, we were not ranked, and they put us in cots in the office cubicles it looked like I always say the building looked like a modern day elementary school with the where you walk and then you kind of the floor would go down, concrete floor would be a ramp and it would go down to a hallway and then go up again, and there were spokes. There was a main area. And then there would be spokes that went out. There were five stories like that. And the top story was the infirmary, the medical bay, and the second level down was the hangar, and the infirmary and the armory. So that's where we got our guns right before the going out to the airlock. There was an armory there, and that's we went up there and got suited up and everything. So I haven't thought about it in a while.
Yeah, so, well, it was a shorter time for you, it must be, in the span of, your years there, it's not so long.
It was a short time, that's right. And it's what everybody asks the most. Most interviews, like the first 4 years I did interviews, the first 4 years of interviews, they were dominated by questions about Mars. Tell us more about Mars. What did you see on Mars? And I'm like, man, I spent probably 12 hours hiking on the surface of Mars, and I spent months inside bases that look like anywhere else underground that you could think of. They were boring. It was pretty boring, mostly.
Any corroboration in your memories, Rebecca, with what?
So you saw me go when he mentioned the tall.
I know, I saw that.
The tall structures.
Yes,
I want to say that I didn't see those structures. I don't think I was in the same place, but with what Elena and I talked about last time was what I call the mantid labyrinth. The group that we were closest to had a very elevated kind of, I just call it a labyrinth. It wasn't like, they lived underground, but it wasn't like caveman caves. It was very, very opulent in its energetic structure, almost like a crystalline structure. And it was not built by them, that it was built by, I was shown psychically these very tall beings, very luminous beings that came in way long time ago. I would call them ancient architects and alchemists and creators who moved around our solar system. And that's who originally built the what I call the mantid labyrinth. The mantids came in later and made it their own. So just a little like
I wanted to ask to bring this topic on because that's something important that came to me as well lately. I was brought to Saturn lately and last month, and I was shown we're flying in the atmosphere of Saturn, different layers, and really in the deeper, way deeper, there were ruins of anti-gravity, still anti-gravity cities, but rocks floating, but ruins, and it looked like it could have been made of translucent material, but it was extremely ruined and damaged. And so the person I was with said to me, these ruins belongs to a civilization that was spread out through this whole solar system long before everyone, long before the Patal, the Cedars, long before them. Even the Cedars, they do not know who they were, these guys. And I said, but how, if it's that old, it's still floating, the mechanism is still working? He said, oh, there's no mechanism. It's the materials by themselves, which have this anti-gravity property in their structure, in their atoms. And so that's this. And when you told the story with the mantids, just the labyrinth, and it matches it. And then I remember, Tony, in your book, Ceres Colony Cavalier, you describe on Sirius and an old civilization. Do you think, could you talk about this, please?
Wow, I didn't think I would get asked that, but it's true that we were aware that the doors into the hangar bay. So the hangar area on Ceres Colony, the one that we use, I thought there was only one for the planet where all the ships would come and go. And it was under the Alhana Mont in the crater. There was a cold trap, like a crater in an entrance. There are giant doors. I mean, 2,000 feet, 1,000 feet tall, big, very giant doors. And it's an airlock that giant ships can fly into. And it's basically an airlock. It's an ancient, made out of stone structure, and it's powered. And they had problems with it, but they said that it was millions of years old, that the door still worked, that it was millions of years old. And there were places that were under, so they didn't officially say this, it was a secret, but the rumor was that they found these places in pockets of water where they would mine, and they were mining, and when they found water, they would suck the water out, and they'd go in there and there'd be ruins. And some of them were very, very deep in the planet. They were like, most of the cities were kind of close to the surface that were connected by trains, but there were places that you would go down, and it was a long ride. It was a long trip to go very far. You could take a train anywhere in 30 to 40 minutes. You could be anywhere on the whole planet, by train. But to go deeper down in these caverns, it would be 45 minutes to an hour and a half of riding a vertical lift down. And they were long, 2-3 miles of a pocket of places, and they had trapezoid shaped doors. So the doors were mentally active. So they converted them, the Deutsch converted them into apartments. I've got an artist thing I'll send you. Hopefully you can put that in there. I've got some artwork of what I remember, but they converted them into apartments, and they were kind of weird. But the door, it would tell the person inside the apartment mentally somebody's standing outside the door, and then they could say enter, and the door would open. And it was a giant stone door. It was tons big. It was very big, that it would sway to the side and you could go in. Or they could say, I don't want them to be here, tell them to leave. And if you did not leave, it would cause you a headache. It would cause you pain. So you could say, I don't want them here, they have to leave. And so they had that technology. That was part of the tech. And that was ruins that they had found there and then they never really wanted to speculate on how old it was. It was highly classified, they were like, you weren't supposed to talk about it. And if you went there into those areas, you weren't supposed to, everybody's aware. There were a lot of places that I never went. So there's a lot of that I didn't see. Like I went there at night, like way late at night. And because I didn't enjoy being around crowds and with a slave collar. I didn't go to the really fancy city areas very often unless there was more than one of us. Then it was a little easier to go with 3 or 4 guys that were slaves, basically slave status. It was easier to go through public that way. But when you were on your own, it was kind of like somebody always was like, hey, come here a second, carry this for me. And it was humiliating, to put it that way. It was just a bad experience. But that was it. I'll get you, I'll send a couple of drawings that I have of those. But I remember the shape was a very common. So in the old, and then some of the tunnels were existing too, and they were the same giant trapezoid shape. They were like, they would come down in the tunnels, and they were smooth. So most of the material, so when we mined it, most of the rocky material of Sirius is very chalky. Like the walls, you know, if you were in a large cavern and you walked up to the wall, they told you not to touch it. It was actually against the law to touch the walls because it would break. You could easily just put your hand into it and you could dig through the walls of the cavern, because it's basically chalky. It's a chalky dust. I don't know really what it was, but it was a chalk. It was just like chalk, if you can imagine a rocky pile of chalk that you could just sit and kind of, you know what I mean, like, and make graffiti. You could sit and edge with your finger and make letters, and like you could dig into the wall. So but these caverns that were the trapezoid shape were hard, and they were made of the same stuff, and they were hard and smooth.
Yeah, so I really love it that myself on Saturn, Rebecca on Mars, and with the Mantis, and Tony on Sirius, we all have a testimony of this ancient culture throughout our star system. And I have something else, is that I spoke with Alex Collier recently about this, and he told me that Morene also had showed him very ancient structures that were here before in our star system, but not telling him much more. So he's actually at the moment in the process of investigating, so he can probably come with some information. That's amazing, amazing, amazing. We're on a track there.
Yeah, and the technology, I can't even call it a technology, the energetic resonance or the harmonics of the structures that they left and the blueprints of energy they left behind that predate structure were so advanced. I mean, it's some of the memories, you know, I don't know, Tony, you must have this too, like where you think, wow, I got to see this stuff, even though those programs were really degrading for me. Like, wow, the mantid labyrinth, as I call it in my own language to myself, was one of those things. Like, I will never forget that. And just the radiance of the energy. And Tony, I said this last time to Elena, it helped create for this mantid group a kind of frequency fence that protected them. And we were tasked with trying to figure out the technology, like how did they do that? Where did they get this? How do we replicate it? How do we undo it so we can get at those mantids more easily, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, wow.
The Deutsch were on the Sirius Colony Corporation. It was a major thing, and they were to the point where they invited other species to come and try to help them reverse engineer the tech of the stonework, yes, of the energy that was powering the stones, and then nobody could do it. No, they had scientists come from other species from all over the place, and none of them could figure it out. So they had operational machinery that they figured out how to use it. They would figure out the science behind it, but they couldn't replicate it, and they couldn't understand really what was powering it or how it worked, any of it. Yes. It was a mystery.
Rebecca, yes, it reminds you.
Same thing. I mean, it's just a mirror of what you know I've been saying too about what I observe with the mantids on Mars. The same exact thing, which is, I mean, it's really inspiring in a way to think about this. The levels of advancement that are really without limit. And it's based on fields of consciousness too. Yes. I feel it's not just material, but it's about, we can relate this to human consciousness. There are no limits to what we're actually capable and how we can work with the living matter that's all around us in a spiritual way. So yes, it's just so fascinating to me. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely fascinating. And I like, Tony, that you said that they brought different ET species to try to understand the technology, the materials. And when I was on Saturn, I was with an Anunnaki friend, and also we were talking. He said, "No, we do not know the Anunnaki. The Anunnaki, they know stuff. They are quite, you know, intelligent and knowledgeable. They didn't know who it was, and neither the Intergalactic Confederation, the Seeders, neither they do not know. The Seeders don't know. Wow! Oh my God, who's that? You know,
it's mind blowing, and it makes me think. I wonder if there's anything ruins somewhere either on Earth or in the Earth from the
Yes.
same species from that we don't know about, that, or that,
Well, yeah, I could speak briefly to that. I was given information on this, and bear with me here. It's about Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. And it wasn't that these people built the stonework of a Göbekli Tepe, but they left an energetic blueprint that could then be located by other people coming later who could build it. So they left almost the data packet in energetic form for it to come to life. Anyway, that's just what I received, and it just hit the mark for me. It made a lot of sense. Really think about that. So leaving an energetic blueprint rather than a structure that could be unfurled later at the right time. Wow.
I
Yeah.
think that a lot of the old, so I'm going to think out loud right now. This is, you know, this is like a glimpse at how, what I'm like, when I'm going through my day, like frying an egg, this is the kind of stuff I think about. I'm thinking out loud is that what if underneath all of the ancient structures, like a pyramid shape, because the pyramids have the shape, we're learning things from like the Vogel crystal, how those work. And so there's a conscious energy is stored. So what if deep under the ground, there's another structure that works the same way, like a Vogel crystal? Like these are the, I've kind of thought about that. Like, and then I thought about it, well, what if there are structures under them that we, you know, because we attribute it to ancient man that built them. So they, obviously they couldn't dig back then very deep into the earth, but that doesn't mean that there's something else there, like you said, that has an energetic blueprint, like another structure deep in the ground under it. So the more I'm thinking out loud and I'm completely speculating, and don't, you know what I mean? Like, don't tell your kids that stuff, because it's just theory. But I think about that all the time. I think some of the mystery of the ancient structures may be that there's actually quite a bit more that we don't see underground.
I wonder also if it is a part of the linear time of the linear time of this star system. I have this feeling that it may be from a different dimension or different time, something that is different. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, right. When we talk about the physics of those
Yeah.
of those machines, because you know, like those doors, I sent the art. So like those doors, they would swing to the side, and they were 3 feet thick. They were 2.5 to 3 feet thick stones. They were giant. They were tons. They were tons, and there were rows of them, hundreds of them that went down. The cavern went miles down. There were thousands of these doors, and they had little compartments that the Deutsche went in and converted to be storage, or like I said, they had an apartment version, and they were kind of Spartan. They were Spartan. You know, the apartment was a very Spartan thing. It was kind of like your stuff. It wasn't very. There wasn't a lot of amenity and whatever. But I'm wondering, the technology of what powers it and how it works could be something that doesn't even reside in our dimension, that it's an interdimensional technology, that there's, you know, it's quantum entangled with something that's somewhere else that's powering it, you know.
Yes,
and
totally. Yeah, completely. Yeah.
Yeah, Rebecca, you mentioned
thinking out loud still.
Yeah, you mentioned, Rebecca, the blueprint of the Mantid labyrinth on Mars, that there was a blueprint, and it was built after the blueprint. That's what you said.
Yeah, it's like these ancient beings, ancient architects, alchemists, whatever we like to call them, left some structure, but it also had energetic, we could say, as a blueprint that was left as well. And the mantids they made it their own, and they elaborated on it. Those mantids were pretty, they were advanced themselves, and of course, mantids being masters of frequency, sound, vibration, and so on, 100% could really make use of it. It's really interesting. They kind of came in and claimed that particular real estate.
Yeah, the mantids have this interdimensional ability, particularity. They can exist on just several dimensions at the time. It's difficult to encompass, but that's what I was explaining. Yes, Tony, you want to say something?
Well, I was going to say that that's probably the whole reason for all of the contested territory on Mars and elsewhere in the solar system is these ruins that everybody wants to understand, because you got to think that the first corporation that figures out the tech, that figures out how to use it, is going to be, in terms of knowledge being currency, they're going to be very wealthy. and, you know, be able to advance and trade the technology for pretty much name their price for anything they want, for even advanced races, all advanced species. And there's, because technology is basically guarded, it's the currency for most of the colonies up there.
Yeah.
So whoever figures it out is going, you know, it's a holy grail. And so I think that was kind of why they wanted to push into the area where the insectoids were residing, is because they probably had access to some ruins that they wanted to go study. That's the real prize.
Rebecca, would
Still
you
thinking
say
out loud.
something?
Yeah, so
I
wow,
see
this
you.
conversation is lighting me up. I was gonna say that what we learned on Mars with that, as I've called it, like a frequency fence, and we're all saying, you know, like Tony, you said they got scientists from everywhere and nobody could figure it out. What we learned too was that you had to be of a certain level of consciousness to interact with what we could call the technology, or the living light field of that frequency fence, using that for an example. So even if some corporation got their hands on the tech, it wouldn't go anywhere, because look at the
Wouldn't work for
consciousness
everybody.
that's trying to run that technology. It's going to go nowhere, which is kind of, it protects it, I mean, from coming into I remember we had a mission to go over there and kind of learn about that frequency fence, and we took a POW with us, somebody who seemed to be like almost like a desouled being or something, sent that person in first, and it was killed. It blew up. And it was very interesting. So, I mean, like, we learned something from that. So I don't know that they ever, our commanders, you know, we didn't have necessarily a need to know about everything we were tasked with over there. They wouldn't always tell us the full story of what we were getting ourselves into. Such was the case with that particular mission, but I do remember that, like, I don't know that we ever learned that much about that particular kind of technology and protection that this group had. Yeah.
It matches very much what Radu Sinamar tells in the book, the Transylvanian series, when they define this underground hole of records under the Busage Mountains, and there's a frequency fence. Only people with the right frequency of, not the body, the consciousness, can pass through the field and the shield. And this is also a technology that is used by the Cedars, the Intergalactic Confederation, when they have holes of records on Earth with arcs, notably. If you have the right DNA and the right consciousness level of frequency, you can go through, you can enter the place. Otherwise, you're like shocked and electrified, and just some people, I think Radu Sinamar said that the guys were dying, were killed. So it's like what you say, Rebecca. So different civilizations, I think, use these techniques.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, if we found all of this all over the solar system, I mean, it's really begging us to up the ante with our development, I could say. Yeah.
Yes, I was explained that on
so we
Earth,
can unlock it. So
yeah, that's it. Yeah. That's it. At the moment humanity reaches the right frequency of consciousness, we can access this technology. Yes. Yeah. And yes, so talking about consciousness, I'd like to go back to the mantids. Tony, you've experienced this incredible mind melt with this mantid on Mars that you were confronted to, and this telepathic field. I could sense it as well when I met a mantid on a ship of the Federation, mantid that was working with positive programs, and I couldn't approach it because there was this field that was coming from her mind, and she was projecting it like a bubble, but it was very like, maybe I speak in meters, like 2 meters around her, and I was like a bit impressed, not scared, but impressed, apprehensive, because I thought that if I was walking into it, she would take over my head. So I want to tell that Rebecca, you've Have you experienced such a connection with mantids?
Oh, I have. I've got a different mantid that I related with. This was pretty strong. This being, I call him Nemo. This was a few years ago, but it wasn't one of the Mars mantids. And I learned a lot from him about just that, the frequency essence. I mean, they are, of any group that I've ever related with, they are the ones who are the most masterful with, like I said, the technology of harmonics and sonar and sound vibration and so on. It was also kind of how we, it's also their weakness in a way. You know, but when I said I had done that drawing recently, like in the last month of the mantids I sent you, and I was getting more information as I was doing the drawing, it was opening up a connection through the field of unified consciousness of the mantids. And they said what they say are, remember that we are not infallible. Our strength is also our weakness. So their strength with using frequency and so on was also one of the ways we took advantage of them. Remember I said we bombed them and then we bombarded them with frequency so we could overcome their unified mind and their coherency and then co-opt them to become our servile attendants, or, you know. And for a long time, I didn't understand. When I got my memories back about Mars, they're still not all back. I don't know if they ever will be, but I didn't understand how do we have mantids working for us on Mars at the base, we're surgeons and technicians and so forth. They're very techie, but yet, so they were working for us, but yet we were fighting these other mantids, and I didn't understand all the subgroups. Like there's a really complex political thing going on with all of Mars, of course, exopolitics of Mars and the mantid groups and so on. But I've come to have more understanding. And that's why at the beginning I said that there are different groups. And Tony, you're a testament to that. Like you said, oh, they killed us all. You know, there are different groups of different dimensional frequencies that might be more inclined to fight and to be the aggressors. So,
well, I got I'm sorry,
yeah.
you're on a roll. Don't let me interrupt you. But I got the impression that the one I met was not particularly a soldier, that he was out there to gather information on, you know, like the rest of the insectoids that we encountered were, and they behaved more like animals. They were clearly had a less of an awareness than the mantid was clearly in charge and had a great deal of awareness of what was going on, and the other ones behaved kind of like animals, like it. And then they moved in unison. That was the other thing, is they all sat still and did not move. They'd sit there and shake it a little bit, and then when one of them moved, they all moved at the same. They were in complete unison when they moved.
It's a hive.
That's a hive. That's really interesting. And you said, Tony, you said some of them were beetles. Was that right?
Yeah, they had beetles. They had like a vertical face with eyes that came down like 6 eyes. And then they all had a pincher. They all had a side-to-side pincher. Every version of insectoid that I saw there had a pincher that went side. The larger spider ones had a large pincher that went sideways, like across, and the smaller ones had still a pretty good sized pincher, but they all had a pincher that went sideways.
You've seen that too, Rebecca?
No, but I mean, I was just thinking, it's interesting about the insectoid races. Yeah. You know, it's just like that's a whole nother conversation. It is. You know, which came first, the insectoids on Earth or the insectoids out there?
I wonder that. I always wonder that. Like, since I got my memories back, I was always hated bugs. I was a bug killer my whole life, and you know, and since I got my memories back, I'm a whole lot more sympathetic. Like, I'm more of the Buddhist thing, like, where I take it outside onto the lawn and let it go. Yeah. I have a lot more appreciation for that form of life after I remembered that interaction. Put it that way. And I got over I think that you know, even though they're hideous, and the insects we have on Earth are hideous and are, you know what I mean, like brutal, the way that wherever they're at in their food chain, they're still very beautiful. I still think that they're very beautiful life forms for the most part. So that was back in the day. I didn't appreciate that before I got my memories back. I totally didn't. I was like people that hated insects.
Yeah.
What would you both of you qualify as? There are some report of other soldiers who saw, they call them spiders. What kind of insectoid or creature would it relate? Do you think? Like spiders?
Oh, well, I mean, Tony, you mentioned him in the beginning. I was killed by one of those spiders. I was
Yeah.
killed by one. And it was one of my memories of being like I was face down in the sand, and I my body was done. I had been it was almost like it had fried something internally, but there was no flesh wound at all. But I was going out, you know, and my consciousness was like, I could feel my consciousness not knowing quite where to go. Anyway, yeah, that's a strong memory for me because of how it ended. Yeah, but I don't. I think that's the only clear memory I have of spider being with the spiders. Tony.
The ones that I saw had very long legs and many legs that were intimidating and many eyes. Like they had they had like a shell that, and it was full of eyeballs. And the thing is, I only saw one really up close. The ones that were around me during that encounter one was behind me and it had a hold of me. It was holding me down. And the other ones were nearby. I could hear them, but I was, you know, in shock, and B, begging for my life. I wasn't taking notes at that time. The other one was they experimented on us. So they did an operational test in one of the bases on the back of the moon in an arena. And they let a bug in on the other end of it. And then like 10 or 12 of us, and they gave us explosives, and we were supposed to suicide and save the other guys' lives. And so we huddled up. It was a terrifying thing, but we were programmed to suicide bomb the enemy. So that was what the program really was. We would take bullets, you know, we were expendable. So that happened. But what I'm saying is, after one of us did engage it and kill the bug, I did walk closer and see it. And that's when I got a good look at its face, and it had been, you know, damaged, but it kind of, you know, after a bug, imagine after a spider, how they fold up and their legs fold when it falls dead. It was like that. It was blown in half. It was, you know, legs were blown off of it, but it had curled up, and I could see its face. And, you know, I got close to it and saw it. And I sent a picture of that in the chat too. So this is some artwork.
Okay. The
artwork of the bugs, I always explain, was artofcon.com. He's a very talented comic book, and he did these pictures so quickly, faster than I could describe them. So they're close. They're not exactly everything across the board, but they're very close. He was just a talented artist. And but the spider was terrifying. To see it, it was a terrifying thing. And like I said, it behaved more like an animal. It was something that behaved with less awareness than like the mantid did. It behaved more like an animal.
Yeah, I would corroborate that just from what I observed in that I was with a small unit of us, and we were just out patrolling, and we saw the spider coming down over a rise, and those guys had it always seemed like vaporizing, but I think it was a cloaking technology, and I either had a pilot error or my stuff didn't work, because I was still standing there and it got me instead of them. But I just remember it seeming so large, and it was hairy and like a dark chocolate color and smelly. I remember a smell of the thing. And it didn't seem, like you said, I didn't get a sense of like emotion, or seemed kind of not something I could relate well to. Of course, in that moment, why would I? But I just mean, yeah, it wasn't like the mantids or the reptilians that I met there. It's just different.
Right.
Yeah.
You're not going to talk your way out of it. It was an encounter with a lion, not a
person. It happened so fast. Yeah, I don't know what kind of. I don't even know what. It was almost like something that came out of its. I don't know if it was a frontal thing from its head or what, but it happened quick.
I remember it had long arms that it kept inside its chest. It had its regular big arms that it walked on, but it had long ones that were basically
Mhm.
sharp, and it could grab you and bite you with them. It was terrifying, and it could reach very far. It was a
Yeah.
very scary thing. It would be normal for anybody to see one and be terrified.
Oh, terrifying, terrifying, terrifying. And did you say this was on the moon that happened with the suicide?
The one, yeah. So the one that I have the artist rendition of was the moon. It was a test run of the programming. They put us through mind control programming, and what they did, my entire military training was fight or flight response, to not retreat, but to stand and fight, even in
Yes.
suicide, and
Yeah.
commit suicide. That was
Yep.
my training. So we were supposed to do that for, and we were the buffer between the real soldiers and the enemy, so that we would just go and be expendable, and they were trying to fill the
Oh, I
battlefield.
get it.
It was an
Okay.
experiment. Mhm.
Yeah, I get it. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Our training for a lot of the same program was through simulations. We didn't necessarily even know we were in a simulation. And it seemed like we could be killed in a simulation, but it was the same thing, like no will, no mercy, and just no fear. Like I call it a kill command altar, because they would flip that switch and all you're going to do is go at your opponent and somebody's going to die,
Right.
And that was it was a really inhumane, to say the least, kind of programming, of course, but that's what they wanted. They got what they wanted out of us.
It's
Yeah.
during the first bit of the encounter, the programming kicked in, and I thought that I was going to be Rambo. Like, I was programmed that I was just going to be successful, that right, that I was going to walk into 50 insectoids by myself with a pea shooter, and I was going to be
Yeah.
Rambo and kill them all, because that was the
Yeah.
programming. And it kicked in. The programming kicked in, and I actually did believe that I was going to be effective in combat with literally no training. And it quickly did, and I guess that was something that really, when I look back on it, it was like finding out that your parents are Santa Claus. Did I say that? But you know what I'm saying? Like, it was that kind of a reveal. Like, I believe they had been telling me that I was going to be good, and it's no problem. We get the bugs, we'll just kill them. There's more bugs to kill. Where it's fine. You're going to be fine. We'll just kill them, just whack them. And then, so to be so ineffective against them was me discovering that I'd been lied to as well. Like, when I got back and thought about it the next day, and in the coming days, I pondered on what was going on. I mean, I knew my situation. I was aware of what was going on. We've training this. This is the tea deliverer, Mackenzie, my daughter, is bringing me tea. And I said, whenever I do interviews, just bring me some hot tea out. Thanks. Wait, hey, right on. Thank you. Sorry, I did that on camera. And this is a shameless product plug for Talks with Tony, my Patreon
nice.
show. So
I will drop a link underneath.
We may have rehearsed that at some point.
You so rehearsed that. Yeah.
What about
it's a good time for intermission there with our conversation.
What about the ant people, what we call the ant people? Rebecca, you mentioned them can you
yeah, that was on my list to ask Tony before we end. Tony, have you ever seen ant beings? But what about me? I mean, the ant beings featured in some of my abductions when I was a kid, and it's kind of come around. I seem to have this sort of karmic way of coming around with groups that have harmed me somehow, that there's some kind of restitution that happens. So I met an ant being later on in recent years who's kind of come back to make amends for all of that. But what I've understood too is that those ant beings seem to be servile to, like, the Greys, like some of the mantis groups as well, that feature in abductions seem to have been co-opted to serve those purposes. At least that's what she has told me. This ant being that I would regard as a guide or a friend now, who comes with very elevated energy. Took us a while to get to that point where I would trust her, because I was like, who are you? Get out of here. I don't want anything to do with this. Anyway, I just was curious, Tony, I'm wondering if you had ants crossing your path at any time.
So in, I I'm trying to think if it was the timeout or the time back. It was the timeout. It was the initial abduction, like in the very first 30 minutes, or the very first hour that I had been taken, when they were waiting, they did a genetic test and they were getting ready for my intake. There were, and I wore glasses, so I had really bad eyesight. My whole life I had laser surgery done, and that's why I don't wear glasses now, but I always wore glasses. And so they took me and I did not have my glasses. So I'm in the room and I couldn't see it. And I know I'm with ETs. So it was blurry, you know what I mean? And so that was the original, the first 30 minutes. So when I went into the programs, at some point they fixed my vision because I didn't need glasses again until the end, until I was put back. But during that time, they were telling me and I said, "You guys are neat. How many different species are here?" And this is the Orion group. So in a base somewhere, who knows where, I really don't know. And it was a rounded room with a hallway with a railing. So like it dropped off, like it was on a level outside of where I was. And I couldn't see it, but they were telling me like, there goes, and you'd really freak out if you saw one of the insectoids. That's what he called. He didn't call them mantids. He called them insectoids. But I said, "What does it look like?" He said, "Like an ant," or And when they walked by, and they were smaller though. They were the size of like a good sized dog height, like 2.5 feet off there. They were tiny. And that was the kind that was in the base where I was. So when I see the artist renditions of the ant people, and especially I think JP's info, there's been some artist renditions of JP talking about them. The people, I think we heard about them. Sirius Colony, we heard about them and that they had bases, but I never saw one. Like we were briefed that they existed, but I don't think I ever met one. I don't remember even meeting one.
Yeah, JP describes the ant people that he met in underground under Florida as very wise and elevated spiritually, like wise elders. And there are many Native American tribes who describe ant people coming from the sky and befriending the locals and then migrating underground in inner earth. So matches this spiritual dimension, isn't it?
And would explain why we didn't do business with them when I was later in a Sirius Colony. Like they wouldn't do business with the Deutsch colony there for the way, just because of their mode. A lot of places in the solar system we were not allowed for that reason.
Yeah, for a good reason. Yeah, you were with the bad guys.
One of the bad guys. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's so interesting. So Tony, yes, you didn't have any interaction with Martian reptilians.
No, and so we were briefed about them. So when we saw videos a couple times, they had tails. The ones that they showed us, they had tails, and but we had a video like one time, and we were briefed that if they entered the battlefield, to not interact with them and actually to immediately exit. So if we were in they called it the theater. If we were in the theater of operations and we saw a reptilian at any time, we were to immediately turn around and get out of there. So there was a thing, but it wasn't likely. They said that area that we was basically all Martian insectoids dominant. So it was a large area that was all insectoids, and then they put this base right on the edge of their territory so that they could study. It was a science base, but apparently that went wrong. But no, I wanted to, and then the other thing is, in our briefing, they made it sound like they were hostile towards us. So in the briefing, they made it sound like they don't want to talk to you anyway. Kind of, that was what that was how the briefing went. They said, if you did come across them, don't talk to one.
That's so interesting, Tony, because I'm going to ask you a question and then tell what I think. The fact that you were told do not approach them if they come into the combat zone, was that because you would stand no chance against them, or because there was some kind of diplomatic reason?
I think it was a like a treaty, there was a diplomatic thing. So they weren't, that's what I mean. Like they were understood. The agreement was that they said, you're not going to see a reptilian. They told us in the briefing, you're not going to see one of these guys, but just in case you do, this is what happens. You get out of there and you don't engage anything, no matter what, even if they're shooting at you. And I think it's funny because that whole briefing was only a couple minutes. We were sitting in a briefing room down, in a base, and it was only a couple minutes, and I've always struggled to remember that, what they told us about that. But the only thing I remember is that we always talked about them having tails, and we talked about them a little bit. But that was the extent of my contact with them on Mars. I never met a reptilian on Mars. The rest of the time I was there, when I went back to the city, I only saw people in the city.
You know why? I know why. Because the Martian reptilians have a treaty, are protected by the Galactic Federation of Worlds. As I was explaining to Rebecca when we did this last video, I saw everything of these situations from the side of the people, the Galactic Federation, who was protecting the Martians, the local Martians. And I didn't see them interacting with the insectoid, but I saw them interacting with the local reptilian that they were calling the Tiru, but that's the name they gave them, because the Galactic Federation of Worlds was empowering them. They were training them and giving them weapons to the reptilians to stand up against the occupants, the MDF notably. And I've seen these scenes as I put in one of my books, people from the Federation giving weapons to the reptilians, the local reptilians. And that's Thorhan and a friend of his. I saw that they were training the Martian resistance. So that makes sense now, Tony, what you just said, that the MDF was saying do not get us into trouble, because that would probably bounce higher.
That was that was our briefing.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, I'm trying to think more about what we saw, but like I said, it was a cheesy briefing movie, and there wasn't a lot of info to it. Like I said, we just instructed, if we did see them, to get the hell away from them, and that we were not there. You in fact are not going to see them. Was kind of what the briefing was, but I don't want to say that I regretted it, kind of thing, but I was very curious about what one would have been like after it was over. When I went to Sirius, when I was shipped to Sirius Colony afterwards, I always wondered what it would have been like, what the Mars ones were like, as opposed. There were pilot reptilians on Sirius that were super rude.
That wasn't the same.
Yeah, right. And so we heard different. I always wondered what the Mars reptilians. I remember looking back on it and thinking what they would have been like.
Yeah,
clearly they were lying to me. They were lying to us about them.
So they're actually nice people. With Rebecca last time, we made a very clear difference between the Martian reptilians and the Sikaar Draco reptilians.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different reptilian races,
Yeah.
I mean, like they're not all Draco. They're not all good, they're not all bad. So
and different colors, different heights. That was I've said that a million times, that people want to just say it's a reptilian, it's evil, and that's not the case. They're actually common out in the cosmos. There's a reptilian humanoid. There's many different kinds, and they're just people. I remember we were very much aware of that fact.
Yeah, the Dark Fleet has been working with the Sikaar Draco reptilians. These are the ones who made the treaties with the Nazis to create the Dark Fleet, and this one are really really not nice at all, and nothing it's totally in a different species and culture than the Martian reptilians. Yeah, and
yeah, so I don't have much more than that. That's pretty much Mars from me.
any question? Any question, Tony? You would like to? Any last question you would like to ask to Rebecca?
So how long were you there? And then, so my curiosity, so I was taken, when I was done, they canceled our program. And so we were basically bodies that had no jobs to do for a while, for weeks.
Wow.
We sat there and did nothing. And then I was taken and I was retrained. They gave me, and it was a comfortable city. It was a city underground. It was an underground, they were domes. And then it went off into places that looked like, you know, if you're walking through a hotel, you know, like a nice modern hotel. There was carpeting, there were curving, flowing walls, and it was comfortable. The architecture was comfortable. But anyhow, I had my own apartment in that time, and then an officer would pick me up and take me to what looked like a computer lab. And there was a gray there, a taller gray that just looks just like a Sikaar that you would explain, like a taller white. And he was the teacher, and he plugged me into, they had an automated system that taught us. And first it did aptitude tests. So it wanted, you know, situational things. Somebody dropped they'd show a movie, somebody dropped their wallet on the ground, somebody pick it up. What do you think she should do? And then, you know, there was situational questions, and that was command. And I failed them down all the way to skilled labor. And then it began to train me on how to do ship maintenance. Well, I'm curious if you had any contact with any of that in a system like that, any of those learning systems, or any of those city area, a bigger area like that.
I have no recollection of being in a big city at all there. And we were trained, I mean, I was on Mars I arrived as a 9-year-old, you know, 10-year-old, and I don't leave until I'm in my 20s, right? So, it was a lot of training time. Like, they knew that they were going to build us out into weaponized assets. They knew that it was going to be, you know, there's all kind of chemical, biological, technical enhancements that were made over time, and a lot of training, simulated training. It's like being in school, but it was to become a combat slave, or what's commonly known as a super soldier, whatever term you want to use. So it was a lot of precise, like, machinations, telekinetic training, to, you know, can you operate this thing with your mind? A lot of steps to that. So there's a lot to do with just getting us to that point. And there's a lot of alterations that happen over time. I feel like they were very precise in their training me to work with telekinesis through a machine, like operate that with your consciousness, training me on to pilot, and then training me on ground patrol and everything else. So I also had a twin, my lab twin, who was basically, he was wed with me through trauma bonding. And we arrived on Mars from a naval station on Earth, where we'd been kept in cages and so on. And it seemed like they had already earmarked us for a certain position. There are things that came later, you know, I was eventually traded off, like they cloned us, and then I was sold off, eventually ending up with the Draco. So there's other experiences beyond Mars, but just to say, I felt like I was never going to leave Mars. It was just on and on and on. Yeah.
Sorry, when you talk about all that, the training, the trauma bonding, you know, I can imagine what that was like. So it's a day at the office for them, but it's something that we would never believe that they would do to young people. I forget what I was going to say. That kind of got me, you know, because I know their mentality of how that is. That's what I was going to say, is that after I was there, they never told me that I was being shipped out. They just the guy, every day, like I said, the first couple of weeks, an officer showed up and walked me to the class, which was like a 5-minute walk, and then after a while he said, you know how to get there, you can do it yourself, just don't be late. And I had an alarm, I had a system that woke me up and everything. But then one day somebody showed up and he said, no, you're coming with me. They didn't tell me anything. I thought I was going to class. I got dressed and they took me and shipped me off, and I went straight to Sirius. So that was how I left Mars. Just one day they just shipped me out. That was it. And I got to think that I wasn't there for 9 months, maybe 9-10 months total, the whole experience. And that was the only time that I had my own room, or my own room with a bath, like my own place. I had my own place.
No, I'm like, you had your own room? What?
Yeah, it was jazzy. And then we had
Far out.
the toilet had the bidet, and there was a fancy bathroom. And then there was a box in the room that made you go to sleep. So it would count down and let you know, and then you immediately went to sleep. And I tested it and tried to fight it and couldn't do it. I woke up on the floor a couple times.
I need one.
That was the tech that they had on Mars. They didn't have that tech on Sirius Colony. They didn't use, they were like, just go to sleep. But it was, and then it woke you up too. So it was the sleep was exactly the same. So I didn't have any spare time. I just woke up, went to school. My food was, I don't know how the food got in my room. I had a tray of food for breakfast. And so I imagine somebody brought it in, but I was always asleep. So that was kind of the lifestyle.
And this was all within, like, you were owned by the colonies and corporate, right? You were there, and then somehow
Mars
you
Colony
ended up
Corporation
with the Germans. Is that correct?
That's right. I was sold off. So I was retrained and basically sold to them, to the Sirius Colony Corp.
It seems like, we were all, as we were all kind of assets in a way that could be traded and made, so selling us off. Very much. It was my experience as well. And it seemed like a big trade. There was so much, we know there's so much that's happened over time with the galactic slave trade, involving other beings as well as humans, human clones, human hybrids, and so on. But it's huge. And I think in a way, I would say I became part of that. I feel that I was also traded out of the solar system with one of my clones. And that's a story that's still not closed in my own recollection. So there's a lot to that. Once they clone you, it's not always that they're cloning me because one of me has expired, but because they can make money or some other trading bargain or agreement can be had as a result. If you think about a weaponized asset, they've spent lots of time and energy put into developing those super soldiers, or however we like to call them, combat slaves. They're gonna build out an economy based on that as well.
So Rebecca, I was unaware that you were sold like that in another capacity with a clone of you version. So like that's literally what my second book that I'm working on is about. Is like an episode that I was sold outside to an ET species, and it consciousness wise was sold and went and did a job and came back. And so I'm writing about that because that's the question I get. I get asked two things about my book, about John. Well, I named him John. It's not his real name. John on the moon base was a shorter African-American boy. There was an incident there, and I found him afterwards. So I'm calling him John. So that's the chapter name is John. And so I get asked about that all the time. And then the other thing is I asked about the extra 10 years when I was sold off. And because I put that in the book, and I left it there as a breadcrumb just to see. I wasn't sure if anybody was, they were going to throw tomatoes or whatever. So that second book, because so many people are asking for it, are going to address those, even though the John scene doesn't work with the rest of them. But you saying that is exactly what I went through. It's exactly the same thing. Like they sold us off again, for the trade. It wasn't for money. It was for knowledge. It was for tech. So, so that's common. So that's something, that's something that post-disclosure, we have to wrap our head around, whether we're doing it or not, that other species are doing this to other people. Yeah. And this is something that we, needs to come back into the conversation. It really, really bothers me when I saw the cancel culture thing, ripping down the statues of Confederate people trying to erase slavery, because our history is how we defeat it. You know, our history is the tale of why slavery was unnecessary. And so for them to rip down our history is to repeat slavery or to try to normalize it somehow. So when you look
Right.
at the history of slavery in America, it's an example of why it doesn't work. It's a perfect example of why slavery is ultimately an obsolete, has obsolescence. But so I did my talk in Orlando about slavery, about the economy of it. And I did it. And when I researched my talk, when I did the research talking points, I really, I learned that basically slavery was just obsolete by the time they outruled it, and the South knew it. So the war was more about ego than reality, because slavery at a certain point of development, it's just not, it actually stunts the technological growth of a society. So sorry, I'm on a rant in that direction, and I'm sorry, ladies.
Oh, it's
I'm done.
oh, it's
Tony,
super
it's
interesting.
really, it's important. I mean, it's such
Yes.
an important topic. I mean, I started tearing up when you're talking about, you know, like, I didn't know that we had that in common, or that perspective in common, like that. It's very emotional for me. I realize that as we're speaking.
Yeah, I know
Very
you like fucking me up too. So I'm not gonna
Yeah, it is emotional. Yeah, so I mean, I appreciate the expounding upon that. The galactic slave trade is something that's near and dear to my heart as far as a topic in many forms, many different layers, many different offshoots. That's a whole constellation of meaning when we talk about galactic slave trade. It encompasses so much, and we were part of that.
Exactly. Well, and so looking back on it, like, you know, Elena is active, like she goes to space all the time, literally, like all the time. So you're active, you're like, it's fresh in your mind. It's a different perspective for you. But for us, it's our history. And we look back on it, you know, Rebecca, and I don't want to speak for you. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I know that I look back on it, and I always have to kind of reassemble it and kind of talk myself into it, that happened, that it really happened, you know, like, because it's so crazy, and we're so fenced in this world, in our reality. But when I do, the next question is, you know, the first thing I think is, it did happen. It did happen. I know all these things line up. I know this. I know these memories. These are not, I'm not imagining this. It's impossible. It's happened. Seattle happened. And then the next question I ask myself is, why? Why did they do this? Why would you do this to a living being, you know, to a consciousness? So I have a different level of awareness than obviously the people that are thinking they're profiting off of slavery. They think they are, but in the long run, it's going to bite them in the foot, just like other people that profit off things that they shouldn't. So, but I asked myself why, and that was the basis of my research for my talk. I wanted to do at least one live performance, and it was at the Galactic Spiritual Informers Connection Conference in Orlando, that I covered that. I probably won't do that again. Like, that's a one-off, that I'm going to really talk about the slavery, because it's so uncomfortable of a subject, and it's a loaded subject, because you're talking to people in the audience that have generational effects of slavery. And so it's a fine line of insulting people. And I really learned a lot about our culture. The more I researched it and compared it to what I went through, because Rebecca, I'll ask you this question. You kind of ignore the thoughts of it as you can, because they're so unpleasant, right? Like when I recall my time up there and I talk about it, I don't talk about a lot of the low points of the slavery.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Because you relive it.
Yeah.
And so people are like that. So to redo that and then speak about it in a public forum, you know, you can dredge up. That's what a lot of our cultural problems are in America. So Elena, I don't know where you're in Ireland, but I know in America, when you talk about culturally, there's a lot of things that dredge up those feelings. And it's a generation, there's a generational trauma. And it really, looking back at my experience and putting together that talk for Orlando, really connected the dots on on things about cultures in America that I did not understand before that. And it's just a dangerous, I don't want to say dangerous, but it's like, you know, the last thing I'd want to do is stand in front of an audience and make them cry, or make them all, you know what I'm saying, like melancholy. and leave the okay, goodbye, good night, and then everybody walks out like somber. So, and that's the magnitude of the subject.
That's
And it's the
reality.
danger.
That's the truth, you know?
We have to go through that to clear the
Yeah.
shit out of the collective. We have to, there's no other way. I mean, what
Well-
festers, I mean, I have all kinds of crazy stuff in my background. If I don't talk about it, I mean, I go into minute detail of excruciating and graphic stuff on my YouTube channel, but it's because it has to clear. And if one person is holding the wound, it belongs to all of us. So
That's right. Wow. And well, and then like I said, as we move forward, as we do join the galactic community, and we do have a frequency that mentality doesn't live in, we are going to get out there and rub elbows with species that do. And so we're going to need to have our history in our back pocket so that we understand what's going on, because like I said, what got me started on that was when there's really is an effort to try to hide the history of slavery in America going on right now, and it's a robbery for it to happen.
Yes, and I am standing on the side of the Galactic Federation, who are empowering population to stand up for themselves and fight against the slave masters and the oppressors. They have this ethics and prime directive and laws, etc., that they're not going to save and rescue people, because they at long term this will go on and go on again. So they empower people, they give them technology, they build programs with them, they educate them, they give them weapons, they train them. They did that on Earth with the Earth Alliance, which is a cooperation of the Earth, good military, and the Galactic Federation. They did that on Mars as well with the reptilians. They create the Mars Alliance. And the thing is, they are waiting for the people to come to this awareness of consciousness, to stand up for themselves and just be together. When we are together, like it's an army. I want to say that, to come to the point, because this guy, Valthor, whom I met, said, we cannot liberate a slave who holds on to his chains. So this is, how does that resonate with you, this thing? Both.
It's true. And there are a lot of forms of slavery that, there's the extreme form, but there are people that are enslaved to their thoughts and the system that we're in. And we see it all the time.
Planet paradigm.
That's exactly right. Yes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think we're seeing it now. I think we see it play out all daily with what's been going on lately since, I don't know, for the last 5 years. We're seeing people that are resisting the change of getting information. There are people with their head in the sand, and they want to follow the mainstream narrative, the news, and they completely have their head. And these are people that are holding on to their chains.
Yes,
really,
that's it.
We've divided into two cultures in the world across the globe, and people that believe what the mainstream is telling them and the people that don't. And it's getting heated. And before it was always a gray area, and some people were, didn't believe the news, but it was kind of okay. But now there are people that believe what's on the news verbatim, and they're holding on to that chain because it's a pack of lies. And there are people that have figured it out, and it's happened to the tune of millions on each side. But I mean, that's what we're seeing play out.
Yes.
So I don't know. I don't have any predictions. That's an observation.
Yes. But we're getting out of there, because with the education, the knowledge, the disclosure, I mean, people wake up to what's really going on. And once you cannot unknow what you know. You just move forward. That's it. And that's why you guys are so important, because you are witnesses and experiencers of all these horrible things that have been going on for ages in this star system, especially on Earth. And that's at the galactic level. I mean, slave trade, it's huge. It's like practically the main income.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, across the board. Even Well, and then, so in my book, what I'm really unpacking is that a lot of what we were taken and sold off to a program, and it seems like as I kind of unpack the details of it, that it seems like the arm of the program was unaware that we were there working as slave labor, that what we were. So that it was a program that was badly behind schedule, and they were desperate to fill it up. So they made a deal with the Sirius Colony Corporation and took they were buying consciousness to power their bio bots. And it was us, and it was me. And so they took us, and it was a different technology. They did not clone me. They made a lesser bio bot, and they borrowed my consciousness. They took us from slaves on Sirius Colony because we were expendable, and they put us in it, and we were running it. And in the program where we were working, where we ended up, which I will wait for the book before I talk about it, I'll come back on and tell you. But the administration was unaware of really what we were. At least I believe so. So I'm still kind of unpacking it. These are things that I never really talked about before. I never really talked about it before in an interview because, like Rebecca, I don't know, in your interviews, if there's things that you want to keep everybody with you and you answer the questions as it goes. And so I never really talked about those extra 10 years because I didn't want to, it's just hard enough to understand already. It's hard enough to explain it to people that you were taken and put back the next day. And, you know what I'm saying? When you try to explain the timeline in an interview, it's like
she's back.
Still left out. Mm-hmm. I'll keep that going.
Here we go.
Sorry,
welcome back again.
Well, Rebecca, last question, if you have last questions for Tony.
Oh, gosh. We can talk for hours.
Or not? Yes, I know. We can do another.
Yeah, I mean,
round.
I don't know if I have a question, but I kind of am glad the thing about the slave trade came up, and it made me so emotional. It made me realize, like, I don't have anybody else that I really talk to about this stuff. And some of the times the emotion can get really caught because I don't, where do you go chat about that? Nowhere. Yeah.
I never realized that about you. And
yeah,
one of these days we'll catch up and do that because, it's for you to get in touch with the pain of it is something that I've learned to not do. Early on when I talk, I'm just saying, explain it like this, is that early on and when I began talking about my experience, I heaped in the good and the bad because I was trying to prove it. It was early. It was 2015, 2016. So I was just telling it all unfiltered and hoping that something would match up to prove my testimony, because I wanted to share it. And what happened was later on when I did interviews and I tried to convey the pain of slavery, the humiliation of it in my interviews, that it felt people were like, yeah, anyhow, tell us about the laser beams, anyhow, tell us what the ship looked like. Like they
100%,
blew that
100%.
off.
Yeah.
So it was something that I've learned to sidestep. But I will say this to everybody listening, and because of what I know, I could see in your eyes, is that when I think about what it was deeply damaging, and there's a great deal of emotional problems that I have today. Like people always think that Tony, you're such a diplomat, or Tony, you're this or that. They tell me this, and I'm thinking to myself, you don't understand that how easy this is because of what I went through. Like they say, you have the patience. How can you sit there and let him yell at you? How can you let that guy sit there and yell at you? I've had that. How can you let somebody speak to you like that, Tony, in my day-to-day life? And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, this was every day for me for years, for a decade, that people spoke to me like this. This is what you don't understand. And I tell people, like, I've actually said this to people that knew me from this, that know my story, that have read my book, and they say, how can you sit there and not say anything? And I go, I was a fucking slave.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I'm really, I just let them peter out. That's all. That was the only thing I could do, is just let the abuser tire, and then just move on, because tomorrow he'll find somebody else to abuse. And that was really how we lived. And there's a lot of trauma there with that. There's a lot of emotion. Like, I'm literally like having therapy right now with you fine people. And but that's what made me what I am. You know what I mean? Like, that's why. And it's now on the back end, I mean, maybe it's some sort of, maybe it's a patience, it's a gift or whatever. And I do, on the inside of me, have a small hateful chip on my shoulder as well. I will say that there is something like, I don't know. I just have a little bit of a chip on my shoulder because of what I went through, and I see it in other people that didn't. And I even posted that once. I did a job. I was working, and somebody was very picky and very unhappy with their very beautiful life and their very beautiful everything. And I posted on Facebook, I said, some people weren't slaves in space, and it shows. Because compared to what the bar, it was set really low for happiness for me after, when I think about it. I like, again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but the bar for happiness is set very low. It's very easy for me to be happy because I lived so bad for a long time. Sorry, I'm on another tangent, Rebecca.
No, but it's all relevant. I mean, Elena and I were talking about my experience with the reptilians on Mars and last time. I know it was like, well, maybe we already said this, but it's I'm going to repeat it, that even though they ended up cannibalizing me for parts, my technology and my biology, like, whatever, I didn't care, because they let me eat with them and they treated me like something. I mean, I did already say this, but those moments are shining bright. Like, somebody just, take me out of a cage in a dark room and be with me. Yeah, absolutely. I get it. I think it's powerful when we come together and talk in this way, and not just about the tech and not just about the aliens, but the more emotional territory and terrain, the landscape of this internally for people who survive the programs. It's very therapeutic, as we've said, but it's also maybe allows the audience to see the inner workings of this and what it's like to go through memory recall and then becoming public with this, and the things maybe that still haunt us too, or that are maybe difficult to relay to people who haven't been in this particular situation.
Yeah, it's something, like I said, that it's something that I've always avoided. The feelings about it, I've always avoided it. And maybe it is important or whatever, but it's hard. Like, it's dredging up right now. Thank you. Thank you for that.
I think,
like I said, this is therapy tonight.
I think you need to chat, not, publicly, and
in front of thousands of people. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not in front of thousands of strangers that have no idea.
Yeah, but it shows how it's real. It shows, I mean, I haven't been through this, but I can see in your both eyes and expression and demeanor, and I mean, so it's so real. I mean, no one can deny that the human emotion, and when it is shared and interacted, like I'm watching you both, it's nearly make me cry. It's so real. It feels so wow. People need to see that happening as well, because it shows them it's not sci-fi stories of shooting reptilians on Mars or spaceship. It's real people. It's real life stories. It's hurt. It's trauma. It's freaking slavery. There's this. It's people went through this.
Well, and to be fair, another point that I made in my talk I will say, and I kind of want to move away from talking about it before I embarrass myself on camera. One point that I made was that something like 6% of the globe, the population of Earth today, lives in slavery. So we were at the convention and there were 1,000 people in the room. I said, so 6 people in this room are slaves currently. So we think that we've been conditioned to think that it's gone. Slavery's gone, and we did the 13th Amendment, and it was 200 years ago, and it's all, or whatever, how long ago, and slavery, we solved it, and it's not a problem anymore. But actually, there are tens of thousands of people today that are living in slavery on the world. So it's not a problem that's solved, and it's something that we have to keep vigilant on, because the way they get away with it is keeping it a secret and saying, look over there, go ahead and look over there, it's not going on. And believe me, there are institutions that want to keep it in practice.
Yeah, so vigilance.
It's worth being said.
Let us raise the frequency before finishing this this conversation. What would be your words of encouragement for humanity with everything that's happening? What would be a positive words to end this? So I don't know who wants to go first. Tony, you want to say something?
Sure. Well, listening to you guys talk about species and the histories and everything, I just want to reiterate the fact that, the insectoids, for instance, or people, once you get to a certain level of consciousness or what's level of awareness, it's a person. And I always say it could be a bucket of goo. If it has a couple 100,000 word vocabulary, it's a person. And the higher up they go, the more aware, the more consciousness, the more words, and the more data it can communicate. But at a certain level, they're people, and everything is. When you look at it, when you look back at it, you look at animals, they speak too. You look at everything, like all of the life forms are beautiful and precious. And so even though I hope that you all get to meet an insectoid one day, and I would hope that you're not as terrified as you would be today about it, because it's just a person in there, the same way that you are, the same way that we are. And I think that's a great thought when you think about it like that. When I look back on it and think about that, I think that's pretty amazing reality of all of creation that we live in. And so that's what's been held from us. We're gonna get it. And I hope you guys all get to meet one day.
Thank you, Tony. Rebecca.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. Yeah, that was brilliantly said, and kind of echoes our last conversation too, I think. Even the difficult topics, it's all part of how we come home to our higher consciousness, higher frequency, and our highest iteration of humanity here. What's possible? Like we were talking about the high tech of this ancient race who left so many relics so long ago. There's so much room for us to progress and open ourselves to what's available to us. And I just feel like this conversation is part of that. And it's so beautiful to be together with you, and I think our audience as well. This was a really elevated and inspiring conversation for me. So I'm just thankful to be here. There's so much yet to unfold for us. And I would say too, my own experiences weren't for nothing. I know it was part of a bigger plan for me. And I hope that maybe a takeaway for people watching this would also be to understand their own experiences or challenges from maybe a perspective that, like Tony was saying, Tony, you might have said my bar for happiness is a little low, but to say that all of our experiences have shaped us into, given us some kind of gift, and not to make, too light of anybody's suffering, but I feel like I've expanded so much through the recollection of my memories and beginning to talk about them in such an open way. I have high hopes for all of us. Yeah. Thanks for having me today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rebecca. Can you remind the audience where they can find you and your work and videos, please?
Yeah, RebeccaRoseBarfoot.com is my website, and then I'm Rebecca Rose Sirius Blue on YouTube if people want to kind of go deeper into my own story.
Thank you very much. And you, Tony, where can people find you?
TonyRodrigues.com, and it's on there. It'll be getting a revamp here pretty soon, and I'm revamping the Patreon show, and I'm hoping to put out some clips. I'm going to start doing shorter clips and kind of get out to people. I've had a private audience. I kind of hid away from all the delete, all of the scrubbing. So there's a paywall on Patreon, but I'm going to start making shorter clips about subject matter that I do, putting those out. And then the Patreon shows Talks with Tony on Patreon, and that's where I'm at. And you can find all of that and the book and lots more on TonyRodrigues.com. So
thank you very much. Thank you very much, you both, to bring your testimonies to the world and to be so brave to speak with your open heart, bravely displaying these emotions and sharing them. It takes courage and honesty, and you're really great people. Thank you very much.